In the name of the one who loves the beloved and love itself. Amen. Please be seated. Reflecting after the 9 o'clock service that I think I've preached elements of this sermon before, but the world has changed, and what I believe is not. So I thought I'd do it again. Okay? I'm going to start with a poem. The Second Coming by W. Yeats. Turning and turning in the winding gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming, hardly are those words out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with the lion's body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it real shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again. And now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. Yeats was cheerful. It's an apocalyptic poem. An apocalyptic poem written in 1919, the end of the First World War. It also witnessed a global pandemic. He was aware of what the aftermath of the First World War had done to the leadership of Europe. He saw problems in that leadership, and some say that he predicted the coming of the Second World War, that he was realizing that there were changes afoot. He wrestled with the idea that there were moments in which the whole world changed, and they could be cataclysmic. The first coming of Christ in a moment when the world was changing and shifting. Good things came from that, but also worlds changed. Things were turned upside down. And he saw it happening again. And his apocalyptic vision of this monster coming out of the desert was a sign of things to come. I wish that he ended with a note of more optimism, but perhaps his words would resonate more strongly with us today if he had. It's an apocalyptic vision. What's an apocalyptic vision? We think it's a vision of the end of the world. We use that word in religion a lot. We think it means the end of the world. It does not. That is not what it means. It means revelation or unveiling. What Yeats is doing in this poem is unveiling the world so that you can see it more clearly. And as I know, I like to talk about Jung. Jung tells us that when we see things clearly, we can deal with them. But we can't if they are hidden from our sight. So Yeats' apocalyptic vision is revealing the world as it is in 1919, not 1994. Then I want to show you a different apocalyptic vision. May I? So when YouTube figures out who you are and it has like an algorithm and it starts sending things that you want, yes? So it sent me this. In 2 years ago, 2022, at the 75th Tony Awards, Joaquina Calapungo performed Let It Burn from the musical Paradise Square. You should Google all of that, because it's really worth watching. It is a passionate song. It wasn't a super successful musical, but parts of it were incredibly successful. She won Best Actress that night at that award for her work on that musical. What's going on in the musical is it's based in the Civil War here in America, in Paradise Square, which was a district in New York City, where free African Americans had made peace with Irish immigrants and lived in harmony with each other. They were pretty chilled out together, and the main character owned a pub with her husband. She was African American, he was Irish, an Irish immigrant, and they owned this pub together, and it was a place of safety for everybody. It was a place where white and black could come together in the middle of that culture of the Civil War that seemed threatening. And at first it was an oasis of peace. And then, as the Civil War was looming and growing, there was a draft. There were draft riots in New York City. Some people used that as a reason to drive a wedge between the African American free people and the Irish immigrants. And there were riots in that environment, and that's what the musical is about. So the song Let It Burn comes towards the end of the musical, when some of her former patrons had come with torches to set fire to her pub. They're going to burn down the safe space that they once shared together. And it was some of the people that she knew. So she steps out of the pub and she looks at them and she says, I know you. You've been here before. You're going to set fire to this building. Okay, let it burn. Because this building is not what this area, this moment in history was about. The building is not what the freedom and our love for each other was about. And one day you're going to remember that. And you'll regret burning this building. But I hope that you'll remember that those values transcend a building. And I'm not going anywhere. Another apocalyptic vision. Looks like the end of the world for some, but actually is an unveiling. A moment where we see ourselves more clearly. In the book of Daniel today, we have an apocalyptic vision of St. Michael and the great turnover of the world. Things are coming to an end. People will suffer. Civilization will give way to another civilization. Some will be saved. But it will be painful. Then Jesus in the gospel also shares an apocalyptic vision. Some of the people following him says, look at these wonderful stones on this temple. And what I think they're saying is, look at how gargantuan, huge, and wonderful it is. We can put our faith and trust in that, can't we? This institution, that building is going to be here forever. This infrastructure of religion and the way that we are, it's the thing that will save us. And Jesus says something remarkable. He says, no, it's not. It's all going to fall down. At some point, it will all collapse. It's not the stones that will save you. And then he goes on to talk about his mini-apocalypse in Mark's gospel. Beware that no one leads you astray. Some people are going to come and lie to you and tell you they know the truth. Some people are going to try and deceive you. There'll be wars, there'll be rumors of wars. But don't be alarmed. This must take place. But the end is still to come. What he's saying is, it's not yet. The people around him were fascinated with the end of the world. They wanted to know when it was going to come. They wanted to know exactly what it was going to look like. They wanted to know, to manage their own anxiety, that they would be safe and that other people would be punished at the end of the world. That's what they wanted to know. Jesus wasn't giving them that reassurance. But he was saying, it's not coming yet. Kingdoms will change. Earthquakes will happen. There will be famines. And this is but the beginning of the birth pangs. That apocalyptic vision unveiled them, showed them what they were like, invited them to look at themselves more deeply. Perhaps you might say held up a mirror to them so that they could look at themselves. That's what Yeats's poem does. That's what the musical Paradise Square does. That's what Daniel was doing in the Old Testament. It's what Jesus was doing as he was talking to people, unveiling who we are and where we are. And nothing I've said so far this morning is in any way necessarily in reference to any political or real thing that's going on in the world today. I'm just reading to you what's in the Bible. It's right there, been there for a long time. But the people listening to Jesus did want to know how the world was going to end, and they wanted to know that other people would be punished and they'd be okay. And Jesus kind of held up a mirror and asked them to look at themselves in that moment. And ended with what I think is a complex image of hope that Yeats doesn't have at the end of his poem. Jesus ends with, "This is just the beginning of the birth pangs." What are birth pangs? It's labor pains. It's giving birth. Something new is coming into the world. A child. Why does this reading happen today in our lectionary? It's because we're getting to the end of the liturgical year. Next week is Christ the King. It's the last Sunday of the liturgical year. Then we start with Advent. We're beginning to gently look towards Christmas and the birth of the child, but we're also beginning to look towards perhaps the fulfillment of hope in all sorts of ways that we cannot fully conceive of them. Birth pangs are cyclical. You have contractions, and then a pause, and then a contraction that's uncomfortable. But something is coming to birth that is wonderful and hopeful. There are some people that really like to take these texts and say they are predicting exactly how the world will end, and I don't think that's what these texts are for. These texts are not telling us what the end looks like, they're telling us what we look like now. The world is always ending for someone. The world is always beginning again for someone. We are always having to look at ourselves in the mirror and really examine who we are within the love of God. We always have to look for the stones that we have put our faith in that are likely to fall down and not be permanent, and we always have to look for the eternal glory of God that is beyond that. The hope of God's love. That has got nothing to do with the immediate situation that we find ourselves in, the building we find ourselves in, the political structures we find ourselves in. There are eternal principles that come to us from the love of God that transcend this moment. And they are the things that will bring us hope. Hard-won hope, perhaps, in difficult days. And like I said, got nothing to do with what's going on around us, and everything to do with the fact that that was the gospel for today. What stones do you put your trust in? What buildings? What structures? What is it like if you find yourself unveiled and have to look at yourself in the mirror and see who you really are? It might be painful. But don't do it alone. Do it in community and do it with God. Because the love of God is eternal and is the thing that brings us hope, whatever else is going on. Amen.